Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 7 Structure, Function, and Neo-Functionalism. And our topic is Criticisms of Functionalism. One of the main criticisms of functionalism is that it does not adequately deal with history. In other words, it is inherently ahistorical but not anti-historical. It does not deal with the questions of the past and history, although the advocates of functionalism have considered evolution and diffusion as important processes of change. Functionalism in social anthropology in the 1930s emerged as a reaction to the 19th century pseudo-historical and speculative evolutionism and diffusionism. It also tried to overcome the ethnocentric biases of the earlier approaches, which regarded the contemporary pre-literate societies, popularly known as the primitive societies, and certain customs and practices found among them as remnants of past. Edward Tyler unhesitatingly regarded the contemporary primitives as social fossils and survivals of the past, assuming that their study would guide us to an understanding of the cultural traits of the societies of the prehistoric times. This would help us in reconstructing the history of humankind. Closely related with this is another criticism of functionalism. It does not effectively deal with the contemporary processes of social change. Thus, in the essence, because it neither able to study the past of the society nor the contemporary changing processes, it is more suited to the study of the contemporary static structures, if there are any. Or perhaps it portrays the societies it studies as if they are static, which in reality may not be so. The picture of the society that functionalists present is likely the picture of a frozen river that tells nothing about the ebbs and flows. By analogy, functionalists freeze society in the same manner as a still camera freezes people and locations in its frame. There are two views on this issue. First, the problem is believed to lie with the theory of functionalism, because when the parts of a society are seen as reinforcing one another as well as the system, when each part fits well with the other parts, then it is difficult to explain how these parts can contribute to change. Or why should the parts change or contribute to the change when they are all in a state of harmony? The second opinion is that there is nothing in functionalism which prevents it from dealing with the issues of history and change. For instance, Parsons' 1966 book titled Societies, Evolutionary and Comparative Perspective reflects the ability of structural functionalism to handle the dimensions of change. So does Smelser work of 1959 on Industrial Revolution. The problem lies, according to some, not with the theory of functionalism, but its practitioners, who rarely address the issues of change, and even when they do, it is in developmental and adaptive terms than in revolutionary. Whether the problems of functionalism has to do with the theory or its practitioners, the fact remains that the main contributions of structural functionalists lie with the study of static, not changing social structures. Another criticism of functionalism is that it is unable to deal effectively with the conflict. Functionalists have overemphasized harmonious relationships. They tend to exaggerate consensus, stability, equilibrium, and integration, disregarding the forces of conflict and disorder and changes emerging from them. For them, conflict is necessarily destructive and occurs outside the framework of society. One may remember here Durkheim, who regarded anomie, the state of normlessness, as a social sickness. Both Comte and later Durkheim were staunchly critical of the Marxist and socialist thought, for they believed that the need of that time was social reconstruction and order. Society had already become quite disintegrated, Comte said, because of the French Revolution, and any support rendered to the idea of revolution would further accentuate disorder. Thus, Comte's positivism and Durkheim's functional explanations paid scant attention to the issues of conflict. In the word of Robert Redfield, these societies were past oriented in comparison to the modern societies, which were future oriented. The past oriented societies were proud of their tradition, which for them was sacrosanct. They wanted to keep it intact, and therefore any attempt to assail it was strongly dealt with. The future oriented societies were not satisfied with their lot. They looked forward to changing their lifestyles, technology, and norms and values. Since the substantiation of anthropological functionalism came from the empirical study of past oriented, technologically simple, pre-literate, and non-civilized societies, it was obvious that the characteristics of these societies would find their conspicuous presence in the theory. Because functionalism does not deal with the issues of conflict, disorder, and change, many critics note that it has a conservative bias. In his critical assessment of functionalism, Goldner says that for Parsons, one of the leading functionalists, a partly filled glass is half full rather than half empty. The point here is that for those the glass is half full are emphasizing the positive aspects of the situation in comparison to those who lay emphasis on the negative side, seeing the glass as half empty. The conservative bias in functionalism is not only because of what it ignores history, change, conflict, disorder, but also what it emphasizes society here and now, norms and values, consensus, order. Functionalists are overwhelmingly preoccupied with the normative order of the society. The individual in functionalism is devoid of dynamism and creativity. He is simply a product of society and its forces constrained him at every juncture. The opposite view is that it is an individual who in fact initiates change in the society. Individuals as much use the system as the system uses them. Those who subscribe to the interactional approach argue that the functionalism has failed to conceptualize adequately the complex nature of actors and the process of interaction. One of the reasons why functionalism ignored the role of the individual in the society was that it was solely interested in explaining the survival of the society. It was interested in the collectivity and not the individual. And even when it was interested in the individual, as was the case with Malinsky, it was only till the point of the satisfaction of its biological needs. It was not to look at and analyze the attitudes and the sentiments of the individual and the role these psyche dimensions play in the initiating social changes. Now let us wind up the session and take rest. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self-learning podcast.